Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. Every Thursday on this channel for quite some time we have been taking a comprehensive look at the Street Fighter series. Amongst these videos we began to analyse the history of the Capcom vs series, and I uploaded comprehensive pieces on X-Men vs Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, then most recently Marvel vs Capcom. It has now been 1 month since the last time we looked at this series, but now I finally feel it is time to look at the 4th game in the Capcom vs series, Marvel vs Capcom 2. It is perhaps the most popular entry from the franchise, and a game some even consider the greatest 2D fighter of all time. So today we are going to look at this game and what makes it so special, but equally as importantly answer the question of, is this really one of the best fighters ever made? This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Marvel vs Capcom 2. Yeah! Marvel vs Capcom 2, The New Age of Heroes, is the direct sequel to Marvel vs Capcom Clash of the Superheroes. The game would appear in the arcades early within the year 2000, over 2 years after the previous entries in the series. This 2-year break from the series was the longest gap between releases yet, as the first 3 Capcom vs games would only have a matter of months between each release. As a tradition with these videos, we normally take a quick look at the game's introductory scene, as it usually gives us a glimpse of what is to come. So with this in mind, let us look back at the intro for Marvel vs Capcom 2, The New Age of Heroes.
Capcom presents
Ready?
Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes.
Now, I have to say that the introduction to the game certainly did not instill me with the same feeling of hype that all the previous entries in the series did with their intro packages. Unlike other Capcom vs game intros, there is no footage of the fighters in action. Neither is there an announcer shouting out the name of the game or other fun phrases like "Welcome to the adventure." Instead, we are pretty much just shown a huge list of features the game includes, along with artwork of some of the characters who appear in the game. I guess the long list of new features must have been what Capcom was most proud of about this one, which would make a lot of sense considering how similar the first 3 games in the series were. There were minor mechanical differences between all the previous games, but the biggest changes between each was simply the roster of characters available. The 3 titles all offered less than 20 playable characters each, but had a different lineup depending on the game's theme. So for a quick run through of these, the first title mixed characters from Street Fighter and X-Men, with most of the character sprites taken from Street Fighter Alpha and X-Men Children of the Atom. Whereas the second game mixed characters from Street Fighter and the greater Marvel universe, meaning that character sprites would once again be ripped from the Alpha series, but this time instead of Children of the Atom, many sprites would come from the Marvel Superheroes fighting game. In the 3rd installment, Marvel vs Capcom, sprites once again got plucked from previous games we have mentioned. However, this time, since the game incorporated the greater Capcom universe, many sprites for this installment would need to be produced from scratch. So, reflecting back on these 3 games, Capcom had milked the Street Fighter roster for this series, the Marvel universe, and had even pulled over some of their best characters from other games, such as Mega Man and Morrigan. So what could they do with Marvel vs Capcom 2 to make the game stand out from the pack? Well, quite a bloody lot as it goes, as the game's introduction has already suggested to us. As one would hope, the game is yet another crossover fighting game featuring a roster of characters from various different franchises across both the Marvel and Capcom universes. A departure from the norm that you would instantaneously notice is that the character artwork remains in glorious 2D, whereas the backgrounds and visual effects have been rendered in 3D this time around, instantly giving the game a distinct look against the title's predecessors. This in turn technically makes the game the first in the franchise to feature a 2.5D graphical style. Before we move on to talking about all the mechanical changes and modes this game received, let us talk about the bloody roster, as, in my opinion, it is one of the greatest things about this game. You start the game out with a character selection of 24, but there are another 32 to unlock. All in all, giving you a roster of a whopping 56 characters. A selection of characters that was so large it was almost unheard of in other fighting games at the moment in time the game saw release. The game's exciting roster would see a return of most of the characters from the previous Capcom vs games, along with characters who had not been seen in fighting games since the likes of X-Men Children of the Atom and Marvel superheroes such as Psylocke and Iron Man for example. Before we move on, let us look at some additions to the roster who have not appeared in this franchise or the Marvel fighting games previously. Firstly, on the Marvel side of things, we have two new playable characters. These consist of Cable, who is the son of Cyclops and Jean Grey. Then we have Marrow, a mutant whose bones grow out of her skin and can be removed from her body, providing her with potential knives and clubs, as well as body armour. On the Capcom side of things, there are even more new fighters though, so let's run through them. Firstly, we have a Mingo, who bizarrely has never even appeared in any games outside of the Capcom vs series. There have been rumours that he is a rejected Darkstalkers character, whereas other sources point to his game being cancelled altogether. Mingo is a round cactus humanoid wearing Mexican clothes and a sombrero, who carries a guitar with him. Ah, the good old days when cultural appropriation was still cool. Also, without a game of her own, we also have Ruby Hart, a French-speaking pirate captain who earned a prominent reputation sailing the seas. She too has no game and is rumoured to be a cancelled Darkstalkers character. However, in 2016, the Capcom website established that she is the younger sister of the main characters from the puzzle game, pirate ship Higemaru Momotaru, Bows and Beards. Once again, speaking of Darkstalkers, Morrigan makes a return to the Versus franchise, but this time is joined by Anakaris and Felicia, enhancing Darkstalkers' prominence within the Capcom vs series. Mega Man and Roll are back too, but this time joined by characters from the Mega Man Legends series, which I guess was still sort of relevant around this game's release. So from the Mega Man universe, the new additions to the roster include Tron Bonne, an anti-hero who is a member of the Bond family of air pirates, who would receive a Capcom game in her own right titled The Misadventures of Tron Bonne. Joining her there is also a character known as Servbot, one of many all-purpose support robots that Tron Bonne built. One of the most surprising roster members added was Sun, a monkey bot from an arcade shoot 'em up from all the way back in 1984. A really surprising inclusion in my opinion, especially considering the depth of characters Capcom would have had to choose from. Finally, in the new characters department, we have Jill Valentine, whose addition would be no surprise at all when you consider the massive success of Resident Evil during the 90s. The anime art style she is depicted in this game is also massively refreshing and different from her appearances in any games previously, all in all making her my favourite addition to the Marvel vs Capcom roster. So now we have gotten through talking about all the new characters, let's switch up to talking about the development of this huge game. As mentioned in previous videos, all the prior Versus games were programmed to run on Capcom System 2 arcade boards. Marvel vs Capcom 2 on the other hand was developed to run on completely different hardware. In fact, this was the first ever fighting game that Capcom would develop themselves that did not utilise the abilities of Capcom arcade boards at all. Instead, the game would be developed to run on the Sega Naomi arcade board, a board that used the same electronic components as the Sega Dreamcast. The Naomi had twice as much system memory, twice as much video memory, and 4 times as much sound memory as its home console counterpart. But all in all, this was the perfect hardware to make a game on that was intended to be ported over to the powerful Sega home console. The game was first announced on December 1st, 1999, and on that same day it was revealed that the Japanese home and arcade versions would be compatible with each other via the use of the Dreamcast VMU. The feature announced would allow players to exchange data between the two versions, earning them experience points which could be used to unlock characters, stages and costumes. It was also announced that day that the game would feature online play between Dreamcast players, which was available through a network known as Match Service. Due to technical limitations of the time, this feature was removed from all international ports of the Dreamcast game. Due to the technical similarities between the Naomi and the Dreamcast, it would only be a matter of months in Japan before the arcade version of the game would reach homes in March of 2000. The game would also reach other shores around the world by the summer of that same year. Now let's finally talk about gameplay mechanics of this title. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes once again brings back tag team fighting, which is why Teddy Long loves this series over any other gaming franchise. Play modes this time around deviate though, offering the player more choice than ever before. Holla holla holla! Instead of just picking 2 fighters for yourself to face off in tag team action, instead this time around we have the option to pick 3 fighters to face off against opponents in 3-on-3 combat, instantly establishing a very practical purpose for the game's huge roster of fighters. Like in previous games, if a damaged character tags out, they can slowly regenerate health when not in play. The variable system also makes a return in this game, however this time it is even more refined. Just like in previous games, you can tag in and tag out at will, taking advantage of the characters you have selected, winning matches when you have depleted the life bar of your opponent's whole team. The variable assist mechanic, first introduced in Marvel Super Heroes vs Street Fighter, is back, allowing players to call upon their off-screen teammates to join their currently selected characters to perform a single special move to aid them. Due to this, the guest character assist first found in Marvel vs Capcom has now been removed. All characters also have 3 assists each, which can vary from projectile moves to healing techniques. The hyper combo gauge also returns, which is gradually filled as players both deal and receive damage. Once this is full, characters can once again use this power to perform hyper combos that deal heavy damage. To add to this, using the meter, the player can also perform delayed hyper combos that execute multiple hyper combos simultaneously, and variable combinations which allow the player to use all 3 of their characters to perform hyper combos at the same time. Other mechanical changes include something known as snapback, which forces opponents to switch between characters, and the game's actual controls have been modified too, changing from a title that features 6 different attack buttons to 4 attack buttons and 2 assist buttons. This move is said to have taken place in order to make the game more accessible to casual players. The game would obviously feature both single and multiplayer modes of play. The game's arcade mode obviously and traditionally consists of the player fighting their way through various encounters until finally reaching the game's end boss. Prior to the last boss, the player must defeat 7 teams of 3 to reach their destination. The final boss fight itself takes place against Abyss, who in typical final boss fashion has 3 different forms in which you must defeat. In this particular instance, the 3 forms also allow for the 3-on-3 playstyle of the game to persist in some way throughout the fight. Abyss is a character who was created specifically for this game, who happens to be a legendary creature forgotten by time and is believed to be just a fairy tale. Abyss is said to be a forbidden weapon sealed away in an underground temple where it spent untold centuries in a deep sleep. According to the game's lore, Ruby Hart was the one who accidentally awoke this character, who as a result would transport the Capcom and Marvel fighters via her airship in order to help stop this beast. Along with the game's arcade mode, the title also offers players a training mode, which allows you to practice moves and combos whilst not in direct competitive combat. On top of this, there is also a score attack mode, which is similar to arcade mode, only with a primary objective being to get as high a score as possible, without the need for a continue. Another new addition to the game, which I briefly talked about when touching on the game's original announcement, is the experience system this game contains. This is present in the arcade version as an incentive to unlock hidden characters, but the Dreamcast version switches this out for what is known as the Secret Factor menu. Basically, when perusing this menu, players can browse this feature and purchase characters, costumes and stages through the use of the points they have earned throughout their playthrough. This element of the game gives the title a level of single player replayability that is arguably a lot higher than with previous entries in the Capcom vs series, or any of the previous Street Fighter games either for that matter. The quest for unlockables is a great incentive to keep players coming back, wondering what else the game has to offer, and a tantalising prospect for completionists who enjoy trying to attain everything within a game. To me, this is the kind of feature that should be in every game, let alone just fighters, as it is an easy incentive and a pat on the back to just keep going. But then again, most greedy developers prefer to just put additional content behind paywalls instead nowadays. So unlockables you attain through skill or resilience are a dying gaming feature today. But if you like this sort of thing, Marvel vs Capcom 2 on the Dreamcast gives you it. So now that we have gone through a rundown of the game and its many features, let's hear what some of the journalists and critics thought of this game on release. Did they like the game as much as many people do today? Let us find out. GameSpot reviewed the game favourably, stating, "The over-the-top nature of Marvel vs Capcom 2 makes the other Versus games look subdued by comparison. Like its predecessor, it isn't the most balanced game in the world, but that doesn't keep it from being a great deal of fun. Fans of the off-kilter action found in the previous Versus games will surely be pleased with Marvel vs Capcom 2, as it represents the first major set of changes the series has ever seen." IGN would lump a ton of praise on the title too, stating, "Capcom sets a new watermark in the Versus series of fighters. All fighting fans must have this game. Marvel vs Capcom 2 proves to be one of the best fighting games out there, one of the Dreamcast most sparkling gems, and an awesome experience." Other publications would just carry on piling praise onto the game, with the Daily Radar proclaiming the title to be the most fun 2D fighter game of all time, and Hot Games echoing this sentiment by stating it's the best 2D fighting game ever made. So, from ploughing through these game reviews from nearly 20 years ago, it seems that the common consensus amongst journalists was that Marvel vs Capcom 2 was in fact the greatest 2D fighting game that had ever been made by that point. But personally, I do not feel this fully answers the question I posed at the start of this video quite yet. Plus, the Marvel vs Capcom 2 story did not quite end in the year 2000 either. Fast forward to 2002 and the Sega Dreamcast would be dead. Sega had officially announced that they would be retiring from the hardware industry, and future Capcom games would therefore no longer be appearing on Sega systems. Which was a damn shame considering that previously the versions of their fighting games on those platforms had been the best versions around for quite some time. The fallout from this would result in Marvel vs Capcom 2 receiving two ports, one version for the PlayStation 2 and the other for the Microsoft Xbox, which were both announced at the Electronic Entertainment Expo in 2002. Once again, like with the Dreamcast version of the game, online support would remain exclusive to Japan, despite this being 2 years removed from the game's previous release. GameSpot once again covered the release of this game, stated that the game had been perfectly translated for new consoles, but also stated that the game's graphics and art style were nowhere near as impressive looking as they were 2 years prior, stating the contrast between 2D and 3D doesn't work quite as well as you might like, and the resulting clash makes for sharp looking backgrounds and relatively pixelated character sprites, which to be fair to GameSpot is a fair point, as a strong case could be made that the whole game would probably have aged even better if it was all in simple 2D. Although GameSpot still looked at the game very favourably, they no longer looked at it as one of the greatest 2D fighters ever, and would even go as far as to state that it has been surpassed on nearly every front since its original release. Games like Guilty Gear X have shown freshly animated, impressively sharp 2D sprites, and Capcom's later releases like Capcom vs SNK 2 are simply better games in almost every imaginable way. With regards to the 2002 release, they would summarise with, if you're a hardcore fan of Marvel vs Capcom 2, yet somehow missed the Dreamcast version when it was originally released, this game is a port that you will definitely enjoy, but anyone else can find better fighting games on the market. In regards to IGN, they would give the game praise, similar to their review 2 years earlier, although they were sorely disappointed with the lack of online play with the Western releases of the game. This sting was particularly sore when you take into account the rise of Xbox Live. They would also criticise the load times in comparison to that of the Dreamcast. Another interesting point to note is that unlike GameSpot, IGN would state that the game even beats out the later released Capcom vs SNK franchise. I guess illustrating how subjective these reviews actually are, and how all of us ultimately need to make our own judgments on many games. The game would resurface again the following generation on both the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The reason for this was mainly due to the fact that a company known as Backbone Entertainment had developed Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix for the systems in 2008, a game that resulted in a lot of people playing competitively online. After this, many fans would request that they release Marvel vs Capcom 2 on the systems, with the online play function implemented. As a result, this would become a reality, and the game would be built using the original Dreamcast version's code as a base, the previously most refined home version of the game. Apart from online play, this version would utilise various filter options for character sprites, offering smooth, crisp and classic looks. Widescreen support was also implemented. These versions of the games would be available to purchase online until 2013, when Capcom announced that Marvel vs Capcom 2 would be removed from the Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network stores, following the apparent expiration of Capcom's licensing contract with Marvel Comics. Over the years, the games remained popular and now sits amongst the most iconic fighting games of all time. Since the game's release, it has always been played at fighting game tournaments too. But despite this, is it the greatest fighter of all time ever made? Well, to re-drum a point home I made earlier in the video, this sort of question can only really be subjectively answered, even when we put criteria in the way to help us reach such a conclusion. But for the sake of entertainment, here are my personal thoughts on the matter of this game. A case could be made to proclaim Marvel vs Capcom 2 the greatest fighting game of all time. The roster is massive, the 3-on-3 mechanic was innovative, and the simplified controls made the game more accessible to players of all skill levels, more than any versus game previously. To top this off, the crazy amount of unlockables gives this game tons of replay value to those who enjoy a single player completionist experience. In many ways, this fighting game offered more than any fighter previously. With this said, the game still has its flaws I have not really even touched upon up until this point. The music is subjectively awful and features a jazz soundtrack, ill-fitting of any fighting game. And although the roster of fighters is huge, only a handful of the fighters are competitive, all in all making the game pretty unbalanced. But then again, the Versus series is not really meant to be about balance in the first place. It's about chaos and fun, which this game offers in abundance. It is about different strokes for different folks really, but I can see why many people would get more enjoyment out of this game than others. It is just a fantastic casual experience. On the other end of the spectrum, many from the fighting game community would put a case forward for Street Fighter 3 to be the best fighting game ever made, due to the lush animation, balanced fighting and unique parry system, all in all contributing to the game's deep competitive nature. I, on the other hand, would simply classify Street Fighter 2 and its iterations as the best of all time, simply due to the fact that it sold the most copies and still remains the most played fighting game right up until this day. The best to me is all about impact, and Street Fighter 2 has made a bigger impact than any other fighting game. In summary, is Marvel vs Capcom 2 the greatest fighter of all time? Well, it depends on your perspective, but a case for it is certainly plausible, which to me makes the overall over-analysis of this title entirely worth it. With this in mind, I would like to point you towards my comment section, so you can let me know which game you think is the greatest fighter of all time. But more importantly, why? I want to hear all of your subjective answers, with the key word being subjective. So that was the history of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and whether it's the greatest fighter ever made. If you enjoyed this content, I upload multiple videos like this every week. So if you could like, subscribe and ring the notification bell, I can let you know whenever I upload new videos. Finally, to conclude, this video on my channel, Top Hat Gaming Man, is funded by the fantastic support I receive from my Patreon supporters, who really do relieve a lot of stress from my life and help encourage me to get videos out to you on a weekly basis. So a huge thanks and massive shout outs to Cole Johnson, JD Robbins, Seabass the Great, Sid Spacies, Andrew Bazansky, Edward O'Reilly, Quang DX, Sponge Matt B, Michael Baker, Computer Man, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins and all of my other patrons. Thank you all very much. Yeah.